G'day, I'm Chris Headlam from Woodbury. I'm on the Red Meat Updates working group.
And I'm Ian Bruce. I'm from TP Jones and I'm also a beef producer on the Red Meat Updates working group. We're here today for the virtual farm tour at Nosswick at Blackwood Creek to visit Scott Colburn.
The reason we chose Scott is because a large percentage of his business is red meat production.
And he's also really stepped up his grazing management in the last few years, and we're here to find out how. Okay, Scott, so would you tell us a bit about Nosswick?
Nosswick's 1,000 hectares in total. We've got two properties, there's Nosswick and there's Maitland. Maitland was purchased in 2010, but all up we've got 1,000 hectares under management. It's a 750 mil rainfall.
And what about irrigation? You've a fair bit of under irrigation there?
Yeah, we've got 450 hectares of irrigation across 10 centre pivots, but 7 of those are tables, and so I've only got 3 fixed pivots. Everything else gets moved during the season, which puts a bit of pressure on. But yeah, we've got 19 pivot sites across properties. And
you're obviously very much focused on your livestock, but do you use cropping in the rotation as well?
Yeah, so livestock is 65 or 75% of our net profit comes out of livestock. Cropping's obviously essential to that though. We grow grass seed and peas being our 2 main cropping enterprises, and they link quite well. You need 2 years out to be able to put grass seed in and to get it certified, and peas and clover do that for us quite well. Stock will go on the clover, finish lambs on clover, and then it'll come into pea crop, then down into grass seed, and then back to peas, back to grass seed, then clover for 6 years or so. And that's generally the rotation.
Sounds like a really good rotation.
We've got quite poor soils and it's quite forgiving on them, but yeah, peas and grass seed fit well with the operation, given we're pulling ground out at a time when we don't require it. We've got a lot of feed around, so you know, we plant peas in at the end of November. They're off by February. I can get the grass seed in behind there, ready to bring in lambs onto fresh grass seed. By the same token, having a large amount of clover means that I'm tight for feed in the winter, and grass seed fills that gap for me quite nicely. We generally go Italians or I've got my first crop of annual this year, and we get that winter production that we're desperate for. Sheep numbers, we have 4,000 breeding ewes. We turn off 9,500 lambs, 5,500 will be from our own flock, and then last year we purchased 4,000 prime lambs in at an average weight of about 36 kilos. 1,000 of those lambs will come into our own flock as ewe replacements. They're a pure Coopworth flock, and we sell a portion to clients and we keep 1,000 for ourselves.
And what about water surety? You're pretty well sorted for water even in dry years?
Yeah, we've got a 1,200 megalitre dam here at Nosswick, filled with natural runoff, and we've got a 380 meg dam at Maitland, filled out of the Cressy irrigation channel. That generally gets us through what we need. We cut back in years when things might be tight. We do a water budget.
Can you tell us about the key people here at Nosswick?
Yeah, so up until March last year, it was just Dad and I. We took on our first employee in March. You know, we've gone through succession planning and Dad wants to take a step back, so we need to replace that labour unit. That said, he still comes to work every day. But so there's basically 2.5 to 3 people here.
What did you do after leaving school?
I spent a year in the Northern Territory. I worked on a cattle station up there at a place called Pigeonhole. And then I went to uni and did ag economics at Sydney. Worked there did 4-year degree there, and then got a job in Sydney trading commodities for a little bit, and then ended up going to America and working on a farm in America for 12 months.
Okay, what was that? What sort of farm was the America?
All grass seed, basically, which is a big factor in our cropping operation here.
Excellent.
And then moved to Denmark and did 12 months in Denmark, and worked on a vegetable operation over there, looking at large-scale horticulture. And then spent some time in London, back in commodities, and then ended up back in Nosswick.
Yeah, so what made you decide to come back to Nosswick to farm?
I've always wanted to come farming. I mean, it's a great opportunity to run your own business, and I enjoy working in the outdoors, you know, as all farmers have been doing it since I could walk. And just the opportunity to be self-employed and really take on an operation that was going ahead.
Your mum and dad started the family farming business at Nosswick. At what stage did succession start to get talked about?
Dad probably started to think about succession 3 or 4 years before I came home, I imagine. Conversations took place on an ongoing basis. I have 2 sisters who are younger than I am, and they're not involved in the farm. I came home in 2012 and worked with him for 3 years. During those 3 years, we sat down as a family and talked about how succession was going to happen at Nosswick. And we sat down with an independent observer who was our accountant. And she went to all members of the family and talked about what each member wanted out of the business, and then came together with a proposed model. And we sat down as a family and took that on board. And you think succession is going to be easy, and it's actually much harder than you give it credit for. And it probably took 2 years. And that was considered quick, I think. Anyway, we drew up a model which meant that the asset wasn't simply divided by 3, because as a farm it makes it very hard to survive with 33% equity. So we did it on the basis of the earning capacity of the asset, and that's how my 2 sisters became separated out of the business. So Nosswick is mine, and there have been payments to 2 sisters. I was very fortunate in that I came back and that I've got parents that are very forward-thinking, they're very open. Dad's not afraid of change, and he was certainly not reluctant to hand over, which was incredibly fortunate because a lot of people aren't in that situation. So here I am, and you know, I was took over 2 years ago, and so I was at 30, and I was being given the property to run. The finances were mine to sort out, and the management decisions were mine. And that's an amazing opportunity when you first come home. I think if you're coming back to a business, you need to have a direction. I didn't want to be 50 and have worked for 15 years with no real idea of what I was going to be taking on or inheriting. But I wanted the decisions to be mine. I wanted to be the one taking the risk and consequently earning the rewards. I think you need to have that direction, and you need to get things in writing very early on, because if you don't have it in writing, it doesn't really count. It needs to be a legally binding document. Everyone needs to sign it, and it's got to be fair. And that fair is a difficult word because you can't split a farm 3 ways and have it equal, but you can have it fair. And that's why we went down the path of the earning ability of the asset rather than the underlying value of the asset. I think it's difficult to take on a business if you don't have the numbers, if you don't control the money, you don't actually control the decisions, because you haven't really got full responsibility of the farm. Thankfully, and this is to his great credit, Dad has been fantastic in stepping back in terms of management decisions. I get his opinion on a daily basis, whether I want it or not sometimes, but he's actually very good, and he's a pivotal role in the management of the business, even though at the end of the day the call is not his to make.
What are the major dot points out of the succession plan that you guys went through?
I think you need to do it early. It needs to be in writing. It needs to be a legally binding document. And it needs to be done in such a way that everybody can have Christmas together. If you can't sit down at the same table as your siblings or your parents, then you haven't done it right. You've ruined the family chasing a business dream, and I think there's bigger things in life. And the final point would be it's going to be harder and it's going to take you longer than you think it's going to be.
Since you've come home, what sort of training activities have you participated in, Scott?
The training activities sort of came around by wanting to change our operation. When I came back, we'd been growing poppies and we'd lost 2 of the last 5 years, and I didn't think this was a great business model, so we chose to focus on grazing as an area that we could improve in. I went and did the lifetime ewe management course with Macquarie Franklin, and then followed that on with a pasture principles course, and that was really good. It brought everything together and tied it all together. And on the back of having those courses and that knowledge under the belt, it's allowed us to increase our stocking rate our annual average stocking rate by 26%, and now sits at 23.8 DSO hectare. Our midwinter stocking rate is at 12.5 DSO hectare, and that's an increase of 24%. And I think all that's come about by doing those training exercises. It's not an area that I had a lot of knowledge in, and it certainly helped improve our operation, and yeah, I think the results speak for themselves. Following on from the pasture principles course, the group decided to stick together and followed on we became a Longford red meat group, and it's a bunch of my peers who are all roughly the same age, have all come home in recent years, and I've got a lot of value from that, having people around that you're able to ask questions of and find out that you're not the only one with that problem.
Yeah, sure.
Has certainly provided a lot of support and help and guidance around where to take your operation and how to fix issues and what everyone else is facing.
So it's clearly helped you increase your stocking rates and your carrying capacity. How about your confidence in grazing management? Do you think that's really improved too?
Yeah, confidence around grazing management has definitely improved. I was certainly starting off a low base, having come home. Seeking outside advice has been really beneficial as well. I mean, I use Basil Doonan from Macquarie Franklin as a grazing advisor. We use a stock agent through Mark Webb and outside agronomic advice, and putting all those 3 professionals together really gives sort of strength around that decision making and makes me feel more confident in the decisions I'm making.
So given that experience, is there any sort of advice you'd like to give other people that may not be making time or have the time to attend sort of training courses or field days? And
yeah, I think you never stop learning, and farming certainly speaks to that. There's avenues to upskill right across the state, and everyone should take advantage of it. I mean, at the end of the day, you're running a business, and that money is going into your pocket. It's a great thing to be picking up new skills, and I like having that knowledge behind me, because it means I can see a direction forward for our operation in terms of expansion and at the end of the day improving our bottom line.
Scott, tell us a bit about your grazing management here at Nosswick.
Well, we changed our grazing management a couple of years ago and moved to bigger mobs and rotationally grazing our stock around. We've got a number of pivot circles with white clover under them, and they are used for finishing lambs, or for basically from birth right through. Our lambs are on clover. Generally, I'd look at sort of 1,500 lambs in a mob, splitting a 40 hectare circle into 10 hectare blocks with electric fencing. So moving that 1,500 mob through the 4 quarters and on sort of a 7-day rotation on our clover under irrigation in high summer has worked pretty well. And that gives you about a 35 to 40 head per hectare basis for your rotation. Our breeding ewes set stock for lambing after weaning. So that lambing down in mobs of 200, and after weaning we'll put them all together, one big mob, rotate them through the property, and they'll do jobs like clean up some of our poorer pastures or our run country. With not the demand on their nutritional requirements, we can really start to improve our pastures with heavy grazing and large numbers of stock.
And helps keep the condition score in check for the ewes at that time of the year.
Exactly. Crossbreds, I'd like to probably join at 3, but This year they've been a bit fatter because of the season.
A bit of a challenge to keep the...
And it is a challenge to keep a crossbred in check. We manage that actually by trading lambs and really taking that excess feed supply and putting it down the mouth of a trade lamb.
Yep.
Or a store lamb, and finishing that lamb, and that has really helped our grazing management in terms of taking those peaks out of our feed surplus, but being aware of our feed troughs enough that we're exiting those lambs at an early enough point in the winter, so that we're building up a feed wedge before lambing, which is typically around one of our tightest periods, that end of winter.
With your pasture management, what do you measure and what do you hope to sort of gain out of what you're...
Well, we use a plate meter, and we're measuring our residuals as the mob exits the rotation, or exits that particular paddock, and we're obviously measuring what they're entering into. You put that into your feed budget, and you know that typically a mob of 1,500 on 10 hectares is going into a 2,700 kilo of dry matter on clover, and coming out at say 1,300 kilos. But plug all that into a feed budget, and then we can make assessments of where we're going to be, because we've got that background growth rate, and that we know that sort of this autumn our dryland country's been doing 45 to 50 kilos of dry matter a day, which is, we've had a great autumn, but it has meant that I've had to go out and buy stores, because I can see that we are becoming understocked, because I also know what weight ranges my lambs are in, and I know that if they're doing 250 grams a day, we're going to be short in a couple of weeks, so we need to go into the market and speak to Mark and fill that gap.
So it certainly ties in and helps a lot with your planning of your trading business with the lambs. What challenges have you faced with increasing your stocking rate, perhaps since you first started here?
I mean, just getting your head around big mobs to start with is probably the very first thing. When we box our ewes together after weaning, you can have a mob of 2,500 ewes, which just from a physical point of view, just from a management point of view, makes things difficult. You need double gateways, you need a lot of pressure. You need to move the mob slowly. You don't take a dog. Just actual physical management of it is a learning curve. But I mean, you just need to be ahead of the curve essentially, because when you're running big mobs or higher stocking rates, things go wrong much quicker. And if you don't anticipate that, then you're going to have a bigger problem.
That's correct. Tell us how the ryegrass seed production fits into the Nosswick farming business.
Yeah, we've been growing grass seed for quite a number of years. It's a good fit with our prime lamb operation. We really struggle for winter feed here at Nosswick because the winters are pretty wet and cold, and it gets us through a feed gap in that June-July period. We put grass seed down in February, and we will be grazing it 5 weeks after planting, provided we irrigate it correctly, and then we'll finish lambs on it over the autumn, and then it gives us good winter feed across that really tight period of the year. And the harder you graze it, the better the seed production. We'd lamb down on it and then lock it up in mid to late October.
Okay, and once the grass seed's harvested, what generally happens to the paddock going forward after that?
Well, we grow Italian ryegrasses, so we get the second year out of it. Ideally, I'd bale the straw, but price is always a consideration. And the price is not there this year, so we're spreading it out, chopping it out of the back of the header and just returning it to the paddock. Means we've got a bit more residue on the paddock, which will slow growth rates down, but I'll put in a mob of ewes and they'll kick it around, and hopefully that'll deal with it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And you've clearly got things really down pat with the numbers, the farm numbers, and exactly where you are going, at least.
Well, we do. We're benchmarking our property every year, and we have done for probably 15 or 16 years now. So we do know the numbers around our operation, just simply because we're submitting all that data every year, and that provides a really good platform for us to know where the property's going and how we're doing and where we should be focusing our efforts.
Well, following on from what we're talking about with benchmarking, let's sort of run through some of the numbers. How has your overall production figures changed since you started with the more intensive grazing management?
Well, if we looked at, so I took over in 2015, so if you look at 2014 as a base year and then compare it to this previous year, 2017 is the last one I got figures for, we have increased our lamb production in kilos of dress weight per hectare by 57%, from 160 kilos dress weight a hectare to 250. And while we've increased the lamb production, the cost of production has actually come down from, I think, $5.70 to $4.80. Obviously the gross figure is bigger, but we're on more sheep, so on a kilos basis it's actually been brought down.
Yeah, right, great. And so you've done that by just growing more grass, running more animals?
Yeah, it's come about
kilos.
definitely. It's come about by transitioning into clover as our finishing crop, and everything is basically lives on clover here up until our grass seed comes through in next April. And we're finding we get amazing results out of mixed white clovers under pivot, and that's really driven our production. That and rotationally grazing our lambs and a focus on our stocking rate.
Yeah, yep, sure. And so those numbers, how do they then affect your net profit for both your breeding and your trading enterprises?
Well, I mean, the breeding enterprise 2014 I think was about $55 in dollars per hectare per 100 mils of rainfall, and that's, as of last year, was I think $76 per hectare per 100 mils, so 38% increase. Whereas trading, well, I haven't probably been trading long enough to give a proper comparison. The trading net profit's at $84.70 in dollars per hectare per 100 mils, and that's sort of the gross margin on our trading enterprise is $2,400, but it's an operation that carries a lot of overheads because it is so labour intensive, and so that's the reason that it's the discrepancy.
Sure.
Scott, tell us about your joining.
Yeah, we joined 4,000 breeding ewes. We put the rams out for 5 weeks, and joining starts on the 1st of April. Our ewe lambs, will put them in for a cycle extra. You don't get any lambs in that first cycle out of your ewe lambs, well, we don't, but it lines up their second cycle with the rest of our flock.
When do you lamb?
Lambing should start on the 1st of September, 5-week lambing, and we get 80% of our lambs in the first cycle.
Okay, Scott, tell us about your scanning and marking results.
Yeah, we typically scan 180% across the flock, including our ewe lambs. If you separate it out, last year we did 217% in our mature age ewes and 120% in our ewe lambs. Our weaning numbers come back a bit off those. We marked 150% last year, and that's probably a number I'd want to be budgeting for most years.
What's happening here?
We're just weaning some lambs. We bought this mob in this morning, and we're processing them. We've drafted the ewes off and we're processing some lambs.
Excellent. And what's the procedure? Is there a vaccine and a drench going there? Or?
Yeah, we bring the mob in, they'll all get foot bathed and then draft them off, and we're putting a 8-in-1 into the lambs, and we're giving them a B12 as well, and they're getting a Tri-Guard drench.
Did these guys get clicked in the cradle?
They did get clicked, yeah. They got a 6-in-1 in the cradle, and they got a click. So we should be
right for fly.
For fly through to January for shearing.
And what sort of weaning weights do you think you're sort of achieving averagely across the mob?
Weighed some yesterday and we were averaging 31 kilos.
Excellent, yeah, okay. And the target weight is for kill?
Well, for kill, I'd like to see them at 48 plus. Gives us a 22, 23 kilo carcass. But the ewe portion, these are straight coop worths, so the ewe portion will be kept for self-replacing flock.
And you sell some of those ewe
lambs? Yeah, we sell some ewe lambs.
Tell us about your infrastructure and your handling equipment here at Nosswick.
Well, we've just started increasing our stocking rate and putting through a larger number of lambs. We've got a Tapari auto handler. It weighs and drafts 3 ways, and we crutch all our ewes through it. and everything, all the lambs will get crutched through it before they go on a truck. And we also this year purchased a VE machine for drenching and vaccinating, and it's
Make
been
it a
fantastic.
lot easier.
Oh yeah, it's
Before you were just doing them up the race?
yeah, just did them up the race here, and having the VE machine is just easier on men and stock.
And sheep flow's a lot better
Sheep
because you're
flow's
not
a lot
stopping
better.
them starting.
Yeah, it's just we can handle bigger mobs. You can hook into 2,000 lambs and get them done in a day, and you don't go home with a broken back and
broken
swearing at
knees.
your dog. Yeah, and swearing at your dog. Yeah.
So Scott, how's your live weight gains going on your lambs, particularly your traded ones that you bought in?
Yeah, we're doing about 250 grams a day at the moment on clover. It's been fairly mild, and we've got good growth rates in our pastures as well. So I think it's pretty good. But what do you think?
Yeah, 250 grams a day is sort of quite standard at the moment. Previous to that, earlier on, there was some better growth rates around than that, but we're finding 250 is about standard at the minute.
We've been buying lambs in at I think we've averaged 38 kilos this year. Buying heavier lambs later in the season now. The lambs we're weighing out here though, 52 and above, 52 to 50, and then under 50 kilos. I'm looking to send you the over 52s.
Yes, so that consignment for next week will be 52 to 55.
Yep. And then the following semi, the next week, will be probably slightly lighter, but just trying to keep them on the grid.
Yeah, keep them on the grid and keep them flowing this time of the year.
Yeah, you don't have a 45 kilo lamb for too long, really.
No, you don't.
Which is quite nice, given looking at feed availability going through into June. Probably want to be out of everything by early to mid-July.
Yeah.
Just so I can get a feed wedge in front of my lambing ewes at the 1st of September.
Thanks Scott for showing us around your farm, and also it was very interesting to have a look at your livestock enterprise and to see the production gains made from your grazing management.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, mate.
And thanks, mate. Thanks very much again. Really appreciate being so open with the figures and showing us exactly how things have been happening here in the last few years since you've come back to the farm.
Not at all. Thanks for coming. Nice to have you.
No worries.